The Nebula Grand Hall hung in the perfect void of deep space, its crystalline spires and soaring arches capturing the light of 1,000 distant stars. At its heart lay the infinite table, a marvel of engineering that defied conventional physics. A smooth, seemingly endless surface of shimmering material that adjusted its dimensions to accommodate representatives from hundreds of species across the galaxy. For 7 eras, it had stood as the physical embodiment of the galactic concord, the place where civilizations came together to maintain peace and prosperity throughout the stars. Today, however, the air in the Grand Hall felt different. Heavier, charged with tension that even the most sophisticated atmospheric regulators couldn't disperse. Ambassador Ilara Vance of the Terran Federation stood at the observation deck, her weathered face reflecting the distant starlight. 70 years of diplomatic service had left their mark. The silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, the sharp lines around her eyes, the permanent furrow between her brows. But it was her eyes themselves that showed the true toll, once bright with idealism, now shadowed with a weary resignation. "The session begins in 10 minutes, Ambassador," her aide whispered, breaking the silence. Vance nodded without turning. "Has the final evidence package been distributed?" "Yes, Ambassador. All representatives have received it, though I doubt many have reviewed it thoroughly." "They never do," Vance said, her voice carrying no trace of the bitterness she felt. "Not until we force them to look." As she turned away from the stars, Vance straightened her shoulders, adjusting the deep blue uniform of the Terran Diplomatic Corps. The silver emblem of Earth and her colonies, a stylized globe embraced by stars, caught the light. Once, she had worn it with unquestioning pride. Now, it felt like a burden she had carried too long. "Let's get this over with," she said, striding toward the chamber doors. "One way or another, today will be a day the galaxy remembers." The infinite table gleamed under the diffuse light of the Grand Hall, its surface reflecting the diverse faces gathered around it. Hundreds of species sat in their designated places, the hulking, armor-plated KRLL delegates, the ethereal, translucent Etheri, the insectoid Zith with their compound eyes constantly shifting, and dozens more, each with their own agenda, their own allies, their own secrets. The Terran seat had always been midway along the table, not at the head, where the founding races sat, nor at the far edges where newer members were relegated. Humanity had earned its place through centuries of thoughtful diplomacy, technological contributions freely shared, and an unwavering commitment to ethical principles that had often made them the voice of conscience in a body increasingly driven by power politics and economic interests. "This emergency session of the Galactic Concord is now in session," announced the presiding speaker, a willowy cerulean whose dark blue skin seemed to absorb the light around him. "Ambassador Vance of the Terran Federation has requested this meeting to present evidence regarding alleged violations of the Sentient Rights Accord on the protected world of Lyra 7. Ambassador, you have the floor." Vance rose slowly, her movements deliberate. The chamber fell silent. "Distinguished representatives of the Concord," she began, her voice strong despite her advanced years. "For the past 3 decades, the Terran Federation has raised concerns about systematic abuses occurring within territories under Concord protection. We have documented forced labor operations, resource exploitation that violates environmental treaties, and the outright enslavement of developing sentient species." She touched a control at her station, and holographic images appeared above the table. Gaunt Lyran workers in mines, children in shackles, entire villages burned to ash. Each time, we have been told that our evidence is inconclusive, that more investigation is needed, that proper procedures must be followed. Meanwhile, the suffering continues, and those responsible grow wealthier and more powerful. Murmurs rippled around the table. The KRYLL delegation shifted uncomfortably, their armored plates clicking in agitation. "Today, I present evidence that cannot be dismissed or ignored." Vance touched another control, and new images appeared, Crystal clear recordings showing KRYLL overseers directing the brutal operation, communications between KRYLL officials and certain high-ranking members of the Concord's own administration, financial records tracing the flow of profits. What you are seeing is irrefutable proof of a slave operation on Lyra 7 that encompasses over 3 million sentient beings. This operation is directly managed by the KRYLL Imperium, with the knowledge and cooperation of individuals within this very body. The KRYLL ambassador, a massive figure, whose battle-scarred plates reflected his species' warrior culture, rose to his full height. This is an outrage. These are fabrications intended to malign the KRYLL people and undermine our position within the Concord. Vance didn't flinch. Every piece of evidence has been authenticated by multiple independent sources. Quantum signatures verify the recordings have not been altered. The financial trails are documented through the Concord's own banking system. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each major delegation. The Terran Federation makes the following demand. The Concord must immediately dispatch peacekeeping forces to Lyra 7, remove all KRYLL personnel, and begin the process of liberation and restoration for the Lyran people. Furthermore, all Concord officials implicated in these crimes must be removed from their positions pending full investigation. She paused, the weight of her next words palpable. If the Concord cannot take these minimal steps to uphold its most fundamental principles, then the Terran Federation will be forced to reconsider its position within this body. The chamber erupted in voices, some outraged, others concerned. The presiding speaker called for order repeatedly before the noise subsided. Ambassador Vance, the speaker said with forced calm, these are extraordinary accusations requiring careful consideration. I propose we adjourn to review the evidence and reconvene in. No, Vance interrupted, breaking protocol. No more delays. The evidence has been before you for hours. The Lyrans have suffered for years. We vote today. After hours of heated debate, accusations, and procedural maneuvering, the moment of decision arrived. The vote was conducted electronically, each delegation registering their position with a touch of their control panels. Vance watched the results materialize above the table. The motion failed by a significant margin. The official language cited insufficient evidence and concerns about sovereignty. The reality was clear to everyone present. The KRYLL and their allies had too much influence, too many economic entanglements with other major powers. The corruption Vance had spent decades fighting had prevailed again. When the speaker asked if there was any other business, Vance rose once more. The Terran Federation acknowledges the Concord's decision, she said, her voice now coldly formal. In response, we are exercising our right under Charter Article 47 to temporarily withdraw from all voting procedures and committee functions within the Concord while we conduct a comprehensive reassessment of our continued membership. A stunned silence fell over the chamber. This is not a full withdrawal, Vance continued, but should be understood as a serious warning. The ideals upon which the Concord was founded are dying. When history looks back on this moment, let it be recorded that at least one voice spoke for those who had none. With that, she gathered her materials and walked out of the chamber, her delegation following behind her. The Terran seat at the infinite table remained physically present, but its surface had dimmed, signaling the change in status. As the chamber doors closed behind her, Vance heard the eruption of voices, the beginning of what would become a galactic earthquake. Within hours, news of Terra's partial withdrawal spread across the stars. The initial reactions varied widely. The KRYL-aligned worlds celebrated, believing they had neutralized a persistent obstacle to their ambitions. Several major powers expressed official regret, while privately calculating how Terra's absence might benefit their positions. But among the smaller, more vulnerable worlds, particularly those who had come to rely on Terran advocacy and protection, the reaction was one of growing anxiety. On Earth and its major colonies, a fierce public debate erupted. Some citizens supported the stand on principle, arguing that the Concorde had become hopelessly corrupt and that association with it compromised humanity's moral integrity. Others worried about the practical implications of isolation, the potential economic impacts, and the security risks of standing apart from the galactic community. In a secure facility beneath the North American continent, a meeting of the highest levels of the Terran government was taking place. Supreme Council Chairman Marcus Thorne presided over the gathering of military, scientific, and political leaders. Ambassador Vance's action has set events in motion that cannot easily be reversed, Thorne said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. We must be prepared for all scenarios, including the worst. A silver-haired woman in a military uniform adorned with the insignia of Fleet Admiral rose from her seat. Project Abaddon is ahead of schedule, she reported. The shield technology tested successfully at the Mars facility last month. Full-scale deployment could begin within 60 days. And the jump drive enhancements? Thorne asked. A thin man with dark skin and intense eyes spoke up. Dr. Sanjay Mehta, Director of Advanced Propulsion. We've achieved stable micro-jumps at 150% efficiency compared to current Concorde standards. Integration with the fleet is proceeding. Thorne nodded solemnly. For decades, we've maintained technological parity with the Concorde as a show of good faith. That era is over. Humanity must now look to its own security. He turned to Vance, who sat quietly at the end of the table. Ambassador, what is your assessment? Is there any chance the Concorde will reverse course? Vance shook her head. No. In fact, I've received intelligence that the situation on Lyra 7 has worsened since our withdrawal. The KRYL are accelerating their operations, punishing anyone suspected of having provided us with information. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then we proceed with Abaddon, Thorne declared. May history forgive us for what we must now do. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy began to feel the effects of Terra's absence from the Concorde's proceedings. Committees once balanced by Terran mediation became deadlocked or dominated by the strongest voices. Trade disputes that would have been settled through Terra's respected arbitration instead festered into economic sanctions and naval standoffs. The first armed conflict erupted in the Cygnus Arm, where two minor powers clashed over a resource-rich asteroid belt. In prior years, Terran diplomats would have been dispatched immediately, backed by the implicit threat of Concorde sanctions. Now, the Concorde's response was sluggish and ineffective, hampered by internal disagreements and lack of will. Meanwhile, Ambassador Vance and her staff maintained their presence in the Nebula Grand Hall, attending all sessions but remaining silent during proceedings. This silence became increasingly unnerving to many delegates. Some began to refer to the Vance silence as a metaphor for the Concorde's failing moral authority. Why do they even stay? Muttered one KRYL delegate to his colleague as Vance sat impassively through yet another inconclusive debate. If they have nothing to contribute, they should leave entirely. They stay to watch us fail, his colleague replied grimly. They stay to bear witness. Rumors of Project Abaddon began to circulate throughout diplomatic channels. Some claimed it was a new weapon system, others a massive fleet being built in secret. A few suggested something more exotic, a way for humanity to cut itself off from the rest of the galaxy entirely. Several delegations, particularly those from smaller worlds who had traditionally aligned with Terra, made discreet attempts to approach Vance and her team, seeking reassurance or offering to mediate a return to full participation. They received the same response each time. The time for talk has passed. Now is the time for action. The Concorde must demonstrate its commitment to its founding principles. On the planet Xylos, a world of breathtaking natural beauty and a long-standing ally of Terra, disaster struck. A militaristic species known as the Vorn, emboldened by the growing power vacuum and secretly backed by KRYL resources, launched an unprovoked assault on the peaceful Xylosians. Their stated goal was access to the planet's rare mineral deposits, but the attack was characterized by excessive brutality. Civilian centers targeted, cultural sites destroyed, acts of atrocity committed against the population. The Xylosian representative brought desperate pleas to the Concord, begging for intervention. Debates dragged on for days. The KRYLL delegation suggested that perhaps the Xylosians had provoked the attack. Others proposed economic sanctions instead of military action. A committee was formed to assess the situation. Throughout it all, Vance and her delegation sat in silence, their expressions grim but unsurprised. By the time the Concord finally authorized a peacekeeping mission, nearly a third of Xylos's major cities lay in ruins and millions had perished. The Vorn had secured their mining rights and established permanent bases on the planet. That evening, Vance received a secure communication from Chairman Thorne. "Abaddon is ready," was all it said. The next morning, Ambassador Vance requested a special session of the full Concord. Such requests from full members could not be denied, and despite their partial withdrawal status, Terra still retained this right. The chamber was filled to capacity. Something in the formal language of the request, something in the persistent rumors about Terran activities, had created an atmosphere of tense anticipation. Vance rose from her seat for the first time in months. All eyes turned to her. "Distinguished representatives," she began, her voice carrying a finality that silenced even the usual whispers. "For 7 eras, the Galactic Concord has represented the hope that diverse civilizations could transcend their differences and work toward common goals of peace, justice, and prosperity for all sentient beings." She paused, looking around the table, making eye contact with many she had known for decades. "That hope has died. The events on Lyra 7 and Xylos have demonstrated beyond any doubt that this body no longer upholds the principles upon which it was founded. The infinite table, once a symbol of unity and cooperation, has become a monument to corruption, self-interest, and moral failure." Murmurs began to rise, but Vance continued, her voice strengthening. "The Terran Federation cannot and will not continue to lend its name and moral authority to an institution that has so thoroughly betrayed its purpose. We cannot sit at a table with those who enable slavery, who turn a blind eye to genocide, who place profit and power above the most basic rights of sentient beings." She straightened to her full height, her eyes flashing with a fire that many had thought long extinguished. "By the authority vested in me by the Supreme Council of Terra, I hereby declare the complete and irrevocable withdrawal of the Terran Federation from the Galactic Concord." The chamber erupted in shouts and exclamations. The presiding speaker banged his ceremonial staff repeatedly, calling for order. Above the din, Vance's voice continued, amplified by the chamber's acoustics. "As of this moment, all Terran diplomatic, economic, and security arrangements conducted through the Concord framework are terminated. All Terran citizens serving in Concord institutions have been recalled. All Terran space is closed to vessels operating under Concord authority." As she spoke, the Terran seat at the infinite table began to fade, its substance seeming to dissolve into motes of light that drifted upward and vanished. The table's symbolic recognition of a member's departure. "We did not reach this decision lightly," Vance continued as the chaos around her grew. "For generations, humanity has stood as the conscience of this body, advocating for those without power, mediating conflicts, contributing our science and culture for the common good. We have received little in return, but empty words and broken promises." The KRYL ambassador rose to his feet, his massive form towering over his section of the table. "This is nothing but a childish tantrum. You retreat because you cannot impose your will upon the greater consensus." Vance turned her gaze directly to him, and something in her expression caused even the battle-hardened KRYL to hesitate. "We retreat," she said softly, yet somehow her words cut through the clamor, "because we will no longer be complicit in your crimes." She touched a control at her station, and a holographic display appeared above the table, a real-time image of the Sol system, home of humanity. Around it, a shimmering barrier was becoming visible, a spherical energy field of unprecedented scale. "The Abaddon perimeter is now active," Vance announced. Similar protections have been established around all major Terran colonies and outposts. Any attempt to breach these defenses will be met with the full force of the Terran fleet, which no longer recognizes Concord restrictions on military technology. A hush fell over the chamber as the implications sank in. To those worlds who have stood with us, who have upheld the true ideals of the Concord, we have not abandoned you. Separate channels of communication remain open. To those innocents who will suffer because of the Concord's failures, we offer what humanitarian aid we can provide without compromising our security. Vance gathered her materials, her movements deliberate and final. The human race now stands alone by choice. We choose solitude over complicity. We choose principle over power. We choose to leave the table rather than break bread with tyrants and their enablers. With those words, she turned and walked toward the chamber doors. The entire Terran delegation rose as one and followed her. As the massive doors swung open, Vance paused and looked back one last time at the infinite table, now bearing the permanent mark of humanity's absence, a dark space where their seat had been, a void that could never be filled. "The galaxy will watch," she said, her words hanging in the air, "as you reveal what you truly are without us." The doors closed behind them with a resonant finality. In the immediate aftermath of Terra's departure, the galaxy descended into chaos. Financial markets collapsed as centuries of economic integration unraveled overnight. The Concord credit, once the stable currency of interstellar trade, plummeted in value. Shipping lanes protected by Terran patrols became hunting grounds for pirates and opportunists. Research projects dependent on Terran scientific expertise stalled. Medical aid missions to developing worlds ceased. Within the Concord itself, the power vacuum triggered a vicious struggle for dominance. The KRYLL and their allies made aggressive moves to consolidate control, but met unexpected resistance from coalitions of smaller powers suddenly united by fear. Sessions of the Concord became shouting matches, occasionally devolving into physical confrontations, something unheard of in previous eras. Behind the shimmering veil of the Abaddon perimeter, humanity turned inward. The Terran fleet maintained constant vigil at the boundary, but no aggression came, perhaps because of fear of the unknown technologies Terra might have developed, perhaps because the rest of the galaxy was too busy with its own collapse. On Earth, after the initial surge of anxiety, a period of remarkable cultural and scientific renaissance began. Freed from the constraints of Concord technology sharing agreements, human innovation accelerated. New forms of art emerged, processing the psychological impact of galactic isolation. A renewed focus on sustainable development and social cohesion transformed cities and communities. In her apartment overlooking the rebuilt San Francisco Bay, Elara Vance watched the sunset, a cup of tea cooling beside her. At 84, she had finally retired from public service. Though her name had become legendary, revered by most of humanity, reviled by many beyond the perimeter. A soft chime announced a visitor. The door slid open to reveal Chairman Thorne, himself now showing the weight of years and responsibility. "May I come in, Elara?" he asked, the formality of their public relationship giving way to the friendship that had sustained them through the crisis. "Of course, Marcus." She gestured to the chair opposite her. "There." He nodded, settling into the seat with a sigh that spoke of bone-deep weariness. "The latest intelligence from beyond the perimeter," he said after taking a sip. "It's not improving." "I didn't expect it would," she replied. "Not yet. Perhaps not in our lifetime. 3 new regional conflicts have erupted. The Cygnus Coalition has collapsed entirely. The KRYLL are facing internal rebellion as their resource streams dry up." He set down his cup. "Some say we caused this, Elara, that we're responsible for the suffering." Vance gazed out at the darkening sky, where the first stars were becoming visible. "We didn't cause this, Marcus. We merely stopped preventing it. The Concord was rotting from within for centuries. Our presence was masking the symptoms, not curing the disease." She turned to face him. "Sometimes the fever must break before healing can begin." And if it never does, if we've condemned the galaxy to an endless dark age, then humanity will remain behind the perimeter, developing, growing, perhaps finding our own path to the stars that doesn't repeat the mistakes of the Concord. She smiled sadly. But I have more faith in that, even now. Faith? Thorn raised an eyebrow. That's not like you, Alara. Not faith in any deity, she clarified. Faith in the fundamental pattern of history. Empires rise and fall. Corrupt systems collapse. And from the ashes, something new emerges. Not always better, not immediately, but different. A chance to learn from the past. She rose and walked to the window, looking up at the night sky now filled with stars. We've received 17 separate diplomatic overtures in the past month, Thorn told her. Most from smaller worlds or coalitions forming in the power vacuum. They're seeking protection, technology, leadership. And your response? The standard one. We're not interested in forming a new concord with humanity at its head. We will consider bilateral agreements based on genuine shared values. Nothing more. Vance nodded approvingly. Good. The temptation to simply replace the KRYLL as the dominant power will be difficult for many to resist. There's one communication that might interest you, though, Thorn added. A coalition calling itself the Restoration Accord. Mostly younger species, a few older ones who've undergone recent political transformations. They've explicitly rejected the structure and principles of the old Concord. They're proposing something they call the Circle of Equals, a fundamentally different approach to interspecies governance. And what do they want from us? Not leadership, not protection, not even technology, Thorn said, a note of surprise in his voice. They want dialogue. They want to learn from our perspective on why the Concord failed and how to build something better. They specifically requested you as the representative, though I told them you were retired. Vance turned back from the window, her eyes containing a spark that had been absent for months. Perhaps, she said slowly, I could manage one more diplomatic mission. 5 years later, in a chamber nothing like the grand, imposing architecture of the Nebula Grand Hall, representatives of 27 worlds gathered in a simple circular room. At its center was not an infinite table, but an open space where speakers stood among equals, no position privileged over others. The location itself was symbolic, a station constructed in neutral space, built collaboratively by all member species with each contributing equally to its design and creation. Alara Vance, now using a mobility aid, but with her mind as sharp as ever, observed from a small alcove. She was not here as a participant, but as a witness and occasional advisor. The Terran Federation had not joined the Circle of Equals, but had established formal relations with it and contributed observers to its proceedings. The current speaker was a young Lyran, her species now slowly recovering from generations of exploitation. The Lyrans had been among the first to join the new alliance, bringing with them a perspective shaped by suffering and resilience. The path before us is neither simple nor certain, the Lyran representative was saying. We build not for ourselves, not for our immediate benefit, but for generations yet unborn. We have seen how quickly noble ideals can be corrupted when power becomes concentrated, when convenience trumps principle, when the strong decide the fate of the weak. Vance listened, hearing echoes of her own warnings from decades past, but now spoken by those who had experienced the consequences firsthand. Our circle remains small, the Lyran continued, and the galaxy remains largely in turmoil. The remnants of the Concord still claim legitimacy. The KRYLL and other powers seek to establish new hegemonies. But here, in this room, we have chosen a different path. As the session proceeded, Vance felt a presence beside her and turned to find a Terran official waiting respectfully. Ambassador, the young woman said quietly, preliminary reports from the perimeter outposts. The KRYLL fleet movements we've been monitoring have changed course. They're no longer approaching Terran space. The demonstration was effective. Then, Vance nodded. The demonstration had been carefully calculated. When KRYLL vessels had begun probing the Abaddon perimeter, apparently testing Terra's resolve and capabilities, a single Terran destroyer had emerged from behind the shield. Using the enhanced jump technology developed under Project Abaddon, it had appeared without warning in the heart of the KRYLL formation, transmitted a simple message of warning, and then vanished before the KRYLL could respond. The message was clear. Humanity's isolation was by choice, not weakness. "There's something else," the aide continued. "We've received an encrypted transmission from within KRYLL territory. Internal resistance groups are gaining strength. They're requesting covert assistance, information, not weapons or direct intervention." Vance considered this. Bring it to the Council. Remind them of our principle. We help those who genuinely seek to build just societies, regardless of species. As the aide departed, Vance turned her attention back to the proceedings of the Circle. A heated but respectful debate was underway about resource-sharing protocols between worlds at different stages of development. The contrast with the dysfunctional, corrupt procedures of the old Concord could not have been more stark. Perhaps, Vance thought, this small beginning could grow into something worthy. Perhaps the painful lesson of humanity's departure had not been in vain. The galaxy was still fractured, still suffering, still far from the ideals she had spent her life pursuing. But here, in this modest chamber, she could see the first fragile shoots of something new taking root. Later, as she made her way slowly back to the Terran vessel that would return her to Earth, she paused at a viewport looking out into the vast starfield. Somewhere out there, the ruins of the Nebula Grand Hall drifted empty, the infinite table abandoned after the final collapse of the Concorde 3 years earlier. It had ended not with a dramatic flourish, but with a whimper, delegations simply stopping attending, funding drying up, until the magnificent structure was left as a derelict monument to a failed ideal. "Was it worth it?" asked a voice behind her. Thorne had come to escort her back personally. Vance didn't answer immediately, her eyes fixed on the stars. "Ask me in 100 years," she finally said. "Ask the Lyrans whose children now grow up free. Ask the worlds finding their own voice in the Circle. Ask humanity, which had to lose the galaxy to find itself again." She turned to him, her weathered face set with the same determination that had changed the course of galactic history. "We did what was necessary. What happens next is up to those who follow us." She nodded toward the chamber they had left, where the representatives continued their work. "But for the first time in a very long time, Marcus, I find myself hoping." Together, they walked toward the ship that would carry them home, behind the perimeter that now represented not just protection, but possibility. The possibility that someday, on better terms, humanity might fully rejoin a galaxy that had learned the cost of abandoning its principles. The stars watched in silence, bearing witness to the small beginnings of what might yet become a new era. An era born from the moment when the galaxy watched in dread as humanity abandoned the table.